Hello there, welcome back to this week's edition of Whether or Not. This evening, I'm your host of the night, Kyle Eck, joined by our forecaster of the evening, Connor Freidhoff. Now, what do you have in store for the forecast?
Well, the forecast is going to be very similar to last week in that above average temperatures by 10 degrees some days. Still seeing those very spring-like conditions, very mild, not what we're used to for at least a mid-February winter, especially for this area.
Yeah, it's very exciting for me to hear because recently I mentioned that I'm such in love with spring-like weather, so it's going to be an early season treat for me. Coming up later in our show, we have Nature in the News, and I heard, Connor, that you have some very interesting stories. What are they?
Yeah, a little different route this time. We'll be talking about record plastic production in 2021, as well as the Brazilian Navy deciding to blow up an aircraft carrier offshore, and that's getting some backlash from them.
Wow. And for my Nature in the News stories, I'm going to be covering the Arctic blast that just happened right after Groundhog's Day here in New England and the Northeast, as well as the ice storm that affected portions of the southern Great Plains and Texas.
All right.
Yeah, so with that, everyone, we're going to be getting into Nature in the News. Much of the southern Great Plains was battered with multiple rounds of sleet and freezing rain from Tuesday through Thursday last week. This happened following a strong cold front bringing with it an Arctic air mass that ended up colliding with incoming moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. Greater than 10 million people were placed under some type of winter weather alert as the storm unfolded. Numerous states such as Texas, Arkansas, and Tennessee saw over half an inch of ice accretion, which led to slick roadways and downed trees and power lines. This then led to widespread power outages for over 1/3 of people, all while temperatures hovered near freezing for multiple days. Given that temperatures across parts of the southern plains have rebounded to well above freezing, the ice threat is over. However, power outages were a problem for Texas and Arkansas residents for days following the storm.
The Brazilian Navy has decided to go an unorthodox path in disposing of an outdated vessel. The decommissioned aircraft carrier Sao Paulo is set to be sunk around 200 miles off the Brazilian coast. The ship itself has been at sea for months, much due in part to a failed recycling operation in Turkey. Unsurprisingly, the plan to sink the vessel entirely has drawn backlash from all directions. The carrier itself contains high amounts of hazardous and toxic materials, including asbestos. The materials aboard threaten ecosystems and marine food chains with complete destruction in that area it is set to be sunk in. This is not an isolated incident either. Shipbreaking Platform estimates that the Brazilian Navy have disposed of upwards of 50 vessels in South Asia. The Brazilian environmental agency IBAMA has struggled to reach a middle ground with the Brazilian Navy. And with not much time to spare, it's becoming more likely that another ecological crisis is on the horizon.
After a very warm January, Mother Nature opened the freezer door over New England on February 3rd. A potent cold front swept through the northeast U.S. late this past Friday, driving Arctic air and whipping winds southward. All of New England was placed under wind chill warnings thanks to record low temperatures and high winds. Early Saturday morning, the temperature in Boston, Massachusetts fell to -9 degrees, factoring in 35-mile-per-hour wind gusts, and the wind chill was -36. However, the bullseye of the Arctic blast was 6,288 feet above sea level on Mount Washington, New Hampshire. Early Saturday morning, the Mount Washington, New Hampshire Weather Observatory recorded a bone-chilling temperature of -47 degrees, while winds gusted to 97 miles per hour, creating a wind chill of, get this, -108 degrees. This broke the previous all-time record low wind chill, not just for the observatory, but for the entire United States. The extreme cold doesn't stick around, however, as residents in the Northeast enjoyed mild conditions to round out the weekend in this past work week.
Figures have revealed that plastic production reached an all-time high in 2021, though recycling efforts have failed to be nearly as efficient. ExxonMobil made $56 billion in profits last fiscal year, much in part due to the 15 billion pounds of polymers used for plastic production. But don't worry, everyone. They also announced that they established a facility for plastic recycling. However, it only has the capability to process 80 million pounds of plastic per calendar year. More and more plastic is not being recycled despite the directives of governments and concerned civilian groups. Plastics have been a part of everyday life since the end of World War II, and they will continue to be for the foreseeable future. Plastic remains a physical and climatic pollutant, producing 450 million metric tons of planet-warming greenhouse gases in 2021 alone. Those plastic bag bans and paper straw initiatives are simply band-aids on a deep laceration. Multiple parties have attempted to draft an agreement similar to the Paris Agreement targeted at plastic production and waste. It is currently unclear if any goals will be met in the near future. However, the next round of deliberations are set for this May. The warm trends are expected to continue into the weekend, but we do have a fairly significant bump to get in over, at least in this storm system here. Low pressure system in Canada, the front is now occluding, so it's going to bring us some rain here in Pennsylvania, at least in the morning. Once we get past the morning commute, morning rush hour, it's not going to be much of a thought. But for most of the mid-Atlantic, for New York, Maryland, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, you're going to be seeing quite the amount of rain showers. You have to go up all the way into New England to get any kind of wintry precipitation like a mix or a snow shower. On Saturday, again, more rain showers to the south, mainly around the Mason-Dixon line and further south down into Virginia, D.C., Maryland. That's where we'll be getting the most of the rain. North of Pennsylvania, seeing some more colder conditions, lower temperatures, and you have some winds going across the lakes, bringing some lake effect snow to cities in New York. Sunday, we get at least a nicer start to, at least a preview to a nice start to the week. We won't have too much to worry about in terms of rain, but again, those folks south of us, the rainy woes are just going to continue. But a high pressure system is going to keep us dry, at least for Super Bowl Sunday and a little bit into Monday morning. For this weekend, 45 is the high on Friday, not typical of any kind of February, at least that I have experienced. Rain will depart in the morning, but the wind is going to stick around, so it's going to be a bit unpleasant, and it'll go run into the nighttime as well. So it's going to bring that low of 29. It's going to feel a little bit more like 20 with a light wind coming out of the northwest. The wind chill is still going to be a factor Friday night. Sunday, the sun will come out to make a few nice appearances to make everything a little bit more pleasant. The high will reach 40 in some spots of central Pennsylvania. And Saturday night, the temperature is going to dip back down below freezing, down to 25, and the clouds will come back in. So a fairly gloomy night and fairly chilly. If you have any kind of plans, bundle up, because you still have these wintry-like low temperatures in the region. Just because it's nice in the 40s during the day does not mean you can't bundle up in the evening. And Sunday, for Super Bowl Sunday, back up to 42 with some more appearances of the sun. It's going to be a nice day if you have any plans to watch the big game. And stay tuned. David Guerrero has a feature on La Nina and its effects on our region. Stay tuned.
Have you ever wondered why we haven't seen much snow or why it's been relatively dry this winter? Now, the explanation lies in the name La Nina. Now, for your Spanish speakers out there, it does not mean that it's been dry because of a girl, but rather of a very well-known weather phenomenon. La Nina, also known as El Niño Southern Oscillation, is a phenomenon that occurs in the equatorial Pacific Ocean and affects the weather patterns around the world. It is characterized by the cooling of the sea surface temperatures in the eastern and central Pacific. The history of La Nina can be traced back to the 1600s, when Peruvian fishermen noticed that the sea became colder and fish became more scarce during the certain times of year. They call this phenomenon El Niño, meaning the little boy, or the Christ child in Spanish, as it usually occurred around Christmas time. It was not until the late 1800s that scientists started to study the phenomenon and its effects on weather patterns around the world. In the 1920s, the term La Nina was introduced to describe the opposite phase of El Niño, where the sea surface temperatures in the Pacific Ocean are cooler than normal. In the mid-20th century, advances in meteorology and oceanography allowed scientists to better understand the mechanisms behind La Nina. It was discovered that the cooling of the sea surface temperatures in the Pacific Ocean was caused by the changes in the trade winds and ocean currents, which in turn impacted the distribution of warm and cold water in the ocean. Today, La Nina is monitored and studied by various organizations, including the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and the World Meteorological Organization, WMO, to help predict the impacts it may have on the weather patterns around the world. In the northeastern United States, La Nina can bring dry conditions during the winter months. The dry winter in the northeast is due to the changes in the atmospheric circulation that La Nina brings about. During La Nina, the jet stream, which is the high-altitude ribbon of fast-moving air that separates cold and warm air masses, is altered. The jet stream typically flows from west to east, but during La Nina, it can become more amplified, meaning it is stronger and more pronounced. This change in the jet stream can lead to a blocking pattern in the upper atmosphere over the northeastern United States, which can prevent storm systems from reaching the region. This blocking pattern can also increase the persistence of high-pressure systems, which are associated with clear and dry conditions. In addition to the changes in the jet stream, La Nina can also impact the atmospheric circulation at lower altitudes. During La Nina, the low-level winds can become stronger and more persistent, which can lead to a reduced amount of moisture being transported into the northeastern United States. This can result into drier than average conditions as there is less moisture available to fall as precipitation. Not only does La Nina directly affect the weather in the Northeast, it also has many more implications worldwide. In Europe, La Nina can lead to a milder and wetter winter. The changing atmospheric circulation can bring in milder air from the Atlantic into Europe and enhance precipitation into the region. In Asia, La Nina can bring dry conditions to the southeast and wetter conditions to the southern regions of China and the Indian subcontinent. In Australia, La Nina can bring increased rainfall to the east coast and a drier than average summer. Overall, La Nina can have far-reaching impacts on global weather patterns, including winter weather in the northeastern United States. It is important to note that while La Nina can play a role in dry weather, it is just one of the many factors that can impact winter weather. Other factors such as local topography can also play a role. In addition, the atmosphere is highly complex and can change quickly, making it difficult to make specific predictions about winter weather several months in advance. Nevertheless, understanding the potential impacts of La Nina can help communities prepare for any potential dry conditions during the winter months.
The warm trends are expected to continue into next week, but let's take a look at that weekend first. Temperatures up in the 40s, very pleasant and mild for this time of year, but look at those lows, mid to high 20s. That's nothing to be trifled with. If you're going to be outside for an extended period of time this weekend, bundle up. It's still wintry-like conditions out there in the evening, despite what we're getting in the daytime. After Friday morning, not going to have to worry too much about rain. After those morning commutes, won't even be a thought. But as we look into next week, Monday and Tuesday, absolutely blistering conditions, at least for this time of year, up to 55 on Tuesday. Wednesday is where we start to see that next weather maker, that next system will make its way through, bringing some slightly lower temperatures, but on Thursday, we're all the way back up there, up to 50. Friday, you see, we're actually going to get down to below 45, so a little bit like more in line with what we're supposed to see in February. But even then, we are still seeing those spring-like temperatures dominate the area.
And thank you for your extended forecast, Connor. Now it's time for our Weather Whiz quiz. Tonight's Weather Whiz quiz question of the week is, what was the coldest wind chill recorded on Mount Washington? Was it A, negative 69 degrees? Was it B, negative 82 degrees? Was it C, negative 95 degrees? Or was it D, negative 108 degrees? If your answer tonight was D, negative 108 degrees, you would then be correct. Wow, Connor, it seems very just unfathomable just to see negative 108 degrees as the coldest wind chill on Mount Washington.
As someone who's been to Mount Washington, the whole place is an anomaly. It's an incredible place I'd highly recommend if anybody is interested, but a negative 108, I'm struggling to wrap my head around that.
I know, and that number alone is why I love springtime weather and why I love the forecast you just gave, because I'm excited for the warmth. Well, thank you for your forecast again, Connor, and we thank you for tuning in this week. We have another jam-packed session for you in store for next week, but before then, have a great one.